Hello, horror stories. My name is Matthew. I have decided to share my story with this audience because I had a very creepy experience that I do not wish on anyone. I want to warn my colleagues to be careful on the roads at night. I am sure we are not alone. I have been driving long-haul trucks on America's highways for more than 25 years. I have always enjoyed my work, meeting new people in new places. However, a few months ago, I experienced something I will never forget. One night, during one of my long trips, I stopped at a rather desolate rest area. It was one of those old run-down rest stops with scrap metal piled up on the side, very dirty toilets and vending machines that didn't work. Anyway, I just wanted to rest. I parked and got off to smoke a cigarette and stretch my legs. I had driven about 7 hours and was a little tired. As I was driving around, I noticed that I had parked next to an artifact. I walked over to see what it was and discovered that it was a very old wooden radio with large rounded buttons. For its size, it was quite heavy. I thought that by cleaning it up a bit and dusting it off, it might work. Maybe it could be used to entertain me on long trips, so I picked it up and carried it to my truck. I rested for a couple of hours and continued the trip. That night, after verifying that the radio was working fine, I reprogrammed it with the idea of testing it. At first, it picked up the signal and listened perfectly, but after a few minutes, it started jamming and kept shutting off. After several minutes of silence, the radio started to play some soft music from the 60s. I thought it was quite curious, but I assumed it was a station from a nearby town and didn't give it much importance. And after a few kilometers with that music in the background, suddenly, the radio stopped playing and something very strange happened. I began to hear a woman calling for help. Her screams were terrifying, and I could hear desperation and terror in her voice. She said that she was on Route 394, which passed through Minneapolis and crossed with 494. I panicked that I might not be able to help her. In the midst of so much anguish and desperation, I managed to identify the exact kilometer she mentioned. I looked at the GPS and realized I was about 20 kilometers away. Very close, but every minute and every kilometer that passed felt like an eternity. I sped up as much as my cargo truck would allow. I still had to deliver the goods, and the weight of the truck would not let me push the gas pedal to the metal. I pushed it to the limit. I continued driving with my hands firmly gripping the steering wheel, sweating as if it were summer, even though it was the middle of winter. The thought that this woman's situation could be life-threatening haunted me. But when I arrived, there was absolutely no one there. I was in exactly the right place, but there was no trace of metal or evidence of a recent accident. I expected to find at least one car or truck from where I assumed the woman was communicating by radio, but there was nothing, no wreckage. My first thought was that the woman had gone the wrong mile, so I decided to keep driving to see if I could find her up ahead, but that never happened. The whole way I didn't see any accidents, cars or trucks stranded on the road. I kept thinking that the woman had gotten the wrong location. Besides, I couldn't call 911 without a precise location. How would I explain that I was at the right place but there was nothing there? Everything seemed normal, except that when I passed the exact kilometer where the woman claimed to be, her voice disappeared from the radio, and that tune from the 60s came on again. I continued my journey, listening to the radio for any clue as to where the woman was, but I heard nothing more from her. I delivered the merchandise first thing in the morning, and after trying to rest for a few hours, I started my return trip in the afternoon. As night fell, I turned on the old radio again, and to my surprise, I heard only the same melody from the 1960s. I changed frequencies in search of variation, but the song remained the same. I was starting to get used to its presence, and suddenly the melody cut out and a man's voice began to be heard instead. He was not asking for help, but pleading for the listener to pass on a message to his wife, Margaret, and son, Dylan, telling them how much he loved them and that he would always be with them. He said he was in a dark and lonely place, hard to explain, and that he sensed he would never be able to return home to them. He begged them to please get that message to him. I was in complete shock, not understanding what was happening or how I could communicate with this person. After a few seconds, the voice disappeared, and the old music started playing again, as if nothing had happened. I still had to deliver the goods, and the weight of the truck wouldn't let me push the gas pedal to the metal, but still I pushed it to the limit. I expected to find at least one car or truck from where I assumed the woman was radioing. But there was nothing. No wreckage. I kept thinking she had gotten the wrong location. He said he was in a dark and lonely place, hard to explain, and that he felt he could never return home to them. By that time, I didn't understand anything. I continued driving as the sky lit up with lightning and thunder rumbled one after another. Although it wasn't raining yet, a big storm was approaching in the direction I was headed. I slowed down, but kept going. After a few minutes, the wind began to blow so hard that it made the truck sway, with gusts that increased the feeling of insecurity on that narrow two-way road. Finally, I decided to put on the emergency lights and pull over to the side for a few minutes, waiting for the wind to die down. The music suddenly stopped, and as I looked a few meters ahead on the road, I saw a cross that looked like marble, shiny, and buried in the sidewalk. The presence of that cross indicated that someone had lost their life on that stretch of road, probably due to a road accident. I felt a shudder as I realized that every time I passed one of these crosses on the road, the melody on the radio stopped and voices began to be heard. I started the engine and continued driving in indescribable fear. However, as I passed that cross, the radio remained totally silent, emitting no sound. The silence was overwhelming. I was very attentive, looking for any other crosses on the road, trying to understand if what had happened was just a coincidence, paranoia, or really true. It was about 2 hours before it happened again. The music stopped just as I was passing a cross on the road, adorned with flowers all over the place. Immediately, I heard the voice of a child crying. Hearing those cries, I almost lost control of the steering wheel. The child was not saying anything, just crying with an unimaginable deep sadness and pain. I tried to turn off the radio, but it didn't work. The child's crying affected me deeply, causing an unbearable pressure in my chest and filling me with an indescribable anguish. The fear and anguish was so intense that I decided not to find out who that cross belonged to, nor if it was related to the child who had lost his life there. I continued driving, and the first thing that occurred to me was to stop at the next rest area or gas station to disassemble the radio and get rid of it. I didn't want to just abandon it, risking someone else finding it and taking it. I knew there was something evil in that device, and I had to get rid of it completely. I drove on in silence, having finally managed to turn off the radio. Only the growing roar of the storm could be heard. Suddenly, however, the radio came on again and began broadcasting interference at full volume. Then, I heard the voices of a man and a woman who sounded like they were of age, desperately screaming for rescue, saying they were choking on the smoke and couldn't get out. Their cries were so heartbreaking that I started banging on the radio to get it to turn off, but to no avail. I struggled to maintain control of the steering wheel, accelerating as fast as I could to get to the next rest area, and was determined to get off that stretch of road as soon as possible, where the scream seemed to be coming from. Finally, as he exited the stretch, the screaming stopped. I couldn't stand the situation any longer, so I stopped at the first gas station I could find. There I disassembled the radio into small parts, and after driving a few more miles, I threw it in the middle of the woods, in an isolated place, so no one could find it. I never imagined that I would live such a terrifying paranormal experience. If someone had told me about it, I would not have believed it. I was always skeptical about these kinds of events, but there are things that are beyond our control and beyond our understanding. Every time I drive down the road at night, those voices come back to my mind. In 25 years, I have never experienced anything as creepy as that. Although strange events have occurred, nothing of this magnitude. I have learned an important lesson: to accept that we are not alone, that there are lost souls among us trying to communicate. If you have enjoyed this story, we invite you to subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any others. Until next time.